Thomas McKenna didn't just work on the Titanic's construction in Belfast. He was the only man who calculated exactly when and how the unsinkable ship would meet its doom. He tried everything to stop the voyage, sending urgent telegrams to officials, making bomb threats to delay departure, even throwing himself in front of the ship at Southampton dock. But what investigators discovered in his hidden wall calculations, a century later, would reveal that his mathematical predictions were accurate to the minute, and his desperate attempts to save lives cost him everything. This is the story of a brilliant engineer whose mathematical genius became his curse. A man who saw disaster in numbers while the world saw only glory, and whose tragic death 5 days before the Titanic sank would rob him of the vindication he died trying to achieve. April 5th, 1912. Thomas McKenna, a 28-year-old structural engineer, was working late in his cramped office at Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. The Titanic, the crown jewel of maritime engineering, sat nearly completed in the dry dock outside his window. While the world marveled at the ship's grandeur, Thomas was hunched over his desk, frantically scribbling calculations that would haunt him for the rest of his short life. Thomas wasn't supposed to be analyzing the ship's structural integrity. That wasn't his job. He was a junior engineer responsible for minor hull modifications. But something about the Titanic's design had been nagging at him for weeks. The spacing of the bulkheads, the quality of the rivets, the thickness of the steel plates. When he ran the numbers through his engineering formulas, the results made his blood run cold. Using principles of fluid dynamics and structural engineering that he'd learned at Queen's University, Belfast, Thomas began calculating what would happen if the ship struck an iceberg at various speeds and angles. He factored in water intake rates, displacement calculations, and the ship's center of gravity. Hour after hour, night after night, he ran scenario after scenario. The mathematics were unforgiving. In every simulation where the ship struck ice at speeds above 20 knots, the outcome was the same: catastrophic flooding, structural failure, and complete loss of the vessel within 3 hours. The watertight compartments that made the ship unsinkable would only delay the inevitable. But it was when Thomas calculated the ship's planned route and cross-referenced it with ice flow patterns from the previous decade that his findings became truly terrifying. The North Atlantic shipping lanes in April coincided almost perfectly with the southern drift of Arctic ice. His calculations predicted that any ship following the standard route would encounter ice fields between April 14th and 15th, specifically in the area around 41°46 N, 49°57 U. Thomas's hands shook as he wrote his final calculation on the evening of April 6th. Collision probability, 85%. Impact time, approximately 11:40 p.m., April 14th. Total loss of vessel, 2 hours, 40 minutes post-impact. The next morning, Thomas took his calculations to his supervisor, Chief Engineer William Carlyle. Carlyle glanced at the papers, laughed, and tossed them back across the desk. "McKenna, you're overthinking this. The ship is unsinkable. That's not engineering opinion. That's fact. Now get back to work on the ventilation systems." Desperate, Thomas tried approaching other officials at Harland and Wolff. Each conversation ended the same way: polite dismissal followed by suggestions that he was suffering from nervous exhaustion. The ship's owners, the press, and the public had invested too much in the Titanic's reputation for anyone to entertain thoughts of disaster. By April 8th, Thomas's behavior had become erratic. He barely slept, spending his nights refining his calculations and his days trying to convince anyone who would listen. His landlady, Mrs. O'Brien, later told investigators that Thomas had become a man possessed, talking constantly about mathematics and muttering about 2 hours and 40 minutes in his sleep. On April 9th, Thomas made his first desperate attempt to stop the ship. He sent urgent telegrams to the White Star Line offices in Liverpool and Southampton, warning of catastrophic structural failure and demanding the voyage be postponed for additional safety inspections. The telegrams were filed away by clerks who assumed they were from a crank. When the telegrams failed, Thomas tried more extreme measures. On April 10th, the day the Titanic was scheduled to depart Southampton, he called in a bomb threat to the local police, claiming that Irish Republicans had planted explosives aboard the ship. The resulting search delayed departure by 3 hours but found nothing. Thomas had hoped the delay might prevent the ship from reaching his calculated collision coordinates, but the Titanic's increased speed to make up time actually made the situation worse. As passengers were boarding at Southampton, witnesses later recalled seeing a wild-haired young man in work clothes running toward the ship, shouting about calculations and icebergs. Thomas had made the desperate journey from Belfast to Southampton, determined to physically block the ship's departure. Security guards wrestled him to the ground as he screamed, "The mathematics don't lie. She'll hit ice at 11:40. 2 hours and 40 minutes. The incident was reported in local newspapers as a deranged Irishman disrupting the maiden voyage. No one connected his specific time predictions to anything meaningful. Thomas was arrested, held overnight, then transferred to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Dr. James Whitmore, the psychiatrist who examined Thomas at the Portsmouth County Asylum, noted in his report, "Patient exhibits symptoms of acute paranoid psychosis with mathematical fixations. Claims to have calculated the exact time and manner of the Titanic's destruction. Recommends immediate treatment to prevent further episodes." The treatment in 1912 was primitive and brutal. Dr. Whitmore believed that Thomas's obsession with mathematical calculations was the root of his madness, and that disrupting his thought patterns through electrical shock therapy would cure him. Thomas was scheduled for a series of electroshock treatments beginning April 11th. During the first treatment, Thomas's heart stopped for nearly 2 minutes before doctors managed to revive him. The second treatment, on April 12th, caused severe convulsions and temporary memory loss. But Thomas's mathematical mind remained intact, and he continued to insist that the Titanic would strike ice on April 14th at 11:40 p.m. On April 14th, the very day Thomas had calculated the collision would occur, Dr. Whitmore decided that more aggressive treatment was necessary. Thomas was strapped to the electroshock table at 3:30 p.m. His last words before the procedure were, "Check your pocket watch tonight at 11:40. When the news comes, remember my calculations were correct." The electrical current administered at 3:47 p.m. was stronger than previous treatments. Thomas's body convulsed violently, and his heart stopped. This time, doctors were unable to revive him. Thomas McKenna died at 3:52 p.m. on April 14th, 1912, exactly 7 hours and 48 minutes before his predicted collision time. At 11:40 p.m. that same evening, 1,500 miles away in the North Atlantic, the RMS Titanic struck an iceberg at precisely the coordinates Thomas had calculated. The ship sank in exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes, just as his mathematical models had predicted. News of the Titanic disaster reached Portsmouth County Asylum the following morning. Dr. Whitmore read the reports with growing horror as he realized the accuracy of Thomas's predictions. The time of collision, the location, even the sinking duration, everything matched the delusional calculations of the man he had killed hours earlier. Panicked by the implications, Dr. Whitmore quickly classified Thomas's case file and had his body cremated immediately. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest during routine psychiatric treatment. No mention was made of Thomas's Titanic predictions or the timing of his death. Thomas's family in Belfast was told only that he had suffered a nervous breakdown and died from heart failure while receiving medical care. His personal effects, including all his mathematical calculations, were returned to his parents, who stored them in his childhood bedroom and never spoke of them again. The tragedy of Thomas McKenna's story lay not just in his death, but in the fact that his mathematical genius could have saved over 1,500 lives. His calculations were more accurate than any official predictions made about the disaster. Modern computer simulations of the Titanic sinking, conducted by MIT engineers in 2012, confirmed that Thomas's hand-calculated models were accurate to within 2% of the actual event. In 1998, Thomas's great-nephew, James McKenna, inherited the family home in Belfast. While renovating the century-old house, James discovered a hidden compartment behind a loose brick in the basement wall. Inside were Thomas's original calculation sheets, preserved in remarkable condition by the dry Belfast climate. The discovery included detailed engineering drawings showing the Titanic's structural weaknesses, mathematical formulas predicting ice drift patterns, and most remarkably, a timeline showing the exact sequence of events that would unfold on April 14, 1912. The final calculation, written in Thomas's careful handwriting, read, "Total time from impact to complete submersion, 2 hours, 40 minutes. God help them all." James took the calculations to Dr. Robert Ballard, the oceanographer who had discovered the Titanic wreck. Ballard was stunned by the accuracy of the predictions and contacted engineering professors at MIT and Queen's University Belfast to verify the mathematical models. Professor Sarah Chen of MIT's Department of Ocean Engineering spent 6 months analyzing Thomas's work. Her conclusion: these calculations represent some of the most sophisticated disaster modeling of the early 20th century. Using only slide rules and hand calculations, McKenna achieved a level of accuracy that would be impressive even by today's standards. His thermodynamics calculations for steel behavior in cold water were particularly advanced for 1912. The verification of Thomas's work led to a broader investigation into his death. Medical records from Portsmouth County Asylum were unsealed in 2001, revealing the disturbing truth about Dr. Whitmore's electroshock treatments. The records showed that at least 12 patients had died during similar treatments between 1910 and 1915, all listed as cardiac arrests. Dr. Whitmore had been using experimental electrical currents far beyond safe levels, believing that higher voltages would more effectively cure mental illness. His methods were condemned even by 1912 standards, but the asylum's isolation and lack of oversight allowed him to continue his deadly experiments. The revelation of Thomas's story sparked international interest in both the Titanic disaster and the history of psychiatric treatment. In 2012, on the centennial of the Titanic sinking, Queen's University Belfast established the Thomas McKenna Memorial Scholarship for engineering students studying disaster prevention and structural safety. The British Medical Journal published a posthumous recognition of Thomas's work, acknowledging that his mathematical models could have prevented the disaster if anyone had taken them seriously. The journal noted, "McKenna's tragedy illustrates how scientific truth can be dismissed when it conflicts with popular belief or economic interests." The Titanic Historical Society installed a memorial plaque at the site of the former Portsmouth County Asylum, which read, "In memory of Thomas McKenna, 1884 to 1912, engineer and mathematician whose calculations predicted the Titanic disaster with remarkable accuracy. He died trying to save lives that the world refused to believe were in danger." Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Thomas's story was discovered in Dr. Whitmore's private journals, which were found in his estate after his death in 1943. The entry for April 15, 1912 read, "The Irish patient's predictions were accurate to the minute. I have killed a man whose only crime was being right when everyone else was wrong. God forgive me. Thomas McKenna's calculations remain on display at the Titanic Belfast Museum, serving as a reminder that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unlikely sources. His mathematical models are still studied by engineers today, not just for their accuracy, but for their insight into how human error and willful ignorance can turn preventable disasters into inevitable tragedies. The story of Thomas McKenna teaches us that genius is often indistinguishable from madness to those who refuse to see the truth. His calculations prove that the unsinkable ship was doomed from the moment it left port, but his warnings fell on deaf ears because the truth was too inconvenient to believe. In the end, Thomas McKenna died not as a hero, but as a footnote in medical records. Yet his mathematical legacy lives on, a testament to the power of human intellect to foresee disaster and the tragic consequences when that intellect is ignored. His story reminds us that sometimes the greatest enemy of truth is not ignorance, but the unwillingness to accept knowledge that challenges what we want to believe. Today, a small brass plate in the Belfast shipyard marks the spot where Thomas worked on his fateful calculations. It bears a simple inscription: Thomas McKenna, engineer, mathematician, prophet. His numbers told the truth when no one would listen.